Alright, hello. Today, it's Sunday, August the 18th. It's a Mercury Cazimi, which is in a square to Uranus and Taurus. Um, at the same time, there's also a full moon in Aquarius. So there's a lot of stuff going on. I also just did a video the other day on a mutable T-square happening right now. And because the Mercury Cazimi, obviously, is Mercury that's involved, the T-square is happening in Gemini, Virgo, signs that Mercury rules. So the Mercury Cazimi is very much connected with the T-square. And it's all, the energy is really peaking off with the full moon. One of the things about Mercury Cazimi is that it's a kind of a death and rebirth process, where I was thinking about I have this book, which I used in a previous video about Spinoza, practical philosophy, and one of the ideas I got from this anyways, I'm not going to read from it today, but is this idea of decomposition, right? And I think that there's something about Mercury Cazimi in that there's something decomposing, like a snake shedding its skin or something like this, right? Like it's like shedding off something and renewing itself, right? And because of this, it sort of has this feeling of like kind of messy or chaotic or unorganized, or like there's some kind of like just throwing off the old dross or whatever and having some sort of a fresh new thing. But it's like kind of, there's also this thing about Pluto, obviously has a lot to do with the death and rebirth, the full moon, and the underworld or whatever. But I'm not, there's something, I had a very specific direction that I felt inclined to go with this, but there's something about the nature of the Cazimi. Well, I'm just kind of putting that out there that I'm hesitant about this because I feel a little bit disorganized or a little bit chaotic in my thinking. But nonetheless, there's some point on here that I wanted to get into, which I'd already established in previous videos talking about this dynamic, mainly when you go with Mercury being the messenger, the communicator, the negotiator, the mediator, all that stuff, right? And if you look at the idea of they call him thrice great Hermes, right? Because of that ability to not just be to be the mediator between opposites rather than just being one opposite or the other opposite. And I have to admit that some of this may be influenced by a recent trend online around Hegelian e-girls, but personally I have never read any Hegel. But there is this. So I'm not gonna approach it from a Hegelian perspective, because the one thing I always run into with this is that there are people always say there's very oversimplified explanations of what Hegel is trying to do with a dialectical synthesis, and that you need to there's a very difficult to understand things so I'm not even going to try to approach it from that angle, right? But the idea is that it is in a broad sense, this whole idea of there being opposites that are negotiated by a third is associated with Hegel in some way, and also associated with the archetype of Mercury, and that there's something maybe inherently Hegelian in the Cazimi. And what I'm just sort of like, I'm noticing too, what I've set up in some of these previous videos is the idea of reactivity, or the idea that Gemini to me feels very kind of like chatty, of having more like small talk. And because of this, a good example that goes with all this like Jupiter Mars Gemini action that we're having is I recently discovered this YouTube channel called Jubilee, and I am kind of horrified by it because it just represents, to me, it feels like the way they present themselves feels very clickbaity, feels like it's gaming the algorithm, although it has this sort of pretense of having a doing things with the spirit of fostering empathy and bridging the gap, having two opposing sides and having an opportunity for them to have a conversation, a dialogue, and that, but at least that, even if it's done poorly or done in it still is an attempt to perform a dialectic between opposites, right? So there is at least something Hegelian maybe about doing this, but there are certain trappings. I mean, I don't know. I haven't watched a lot of these videos, but there's something about. I mentioned it just offhand to my sister, and she was saying that there's a lot that she's never watched it, but she's seen a lot of reaction videos, right? And this is what I was kind of getting at with the quality of the Mars, Jupiter, and Gemini, and all this Mercury stuff, is that Mercury rules. I mentioned this before. This thing about like court sports, like you're going back and forth on a basketball court, hitting a ball back and forth on a tennis court, going back and forth on a soccer field or hockey or whatever. There's a back and forth dialectic that could be in a sports game or opposing political parties or in a debate or a dialogue, you name it, right? So there's something about the presence of two variables and that being negotiated, or somehow the act of a mediator who's a party that doesn't identify with either of them but mediates them, or there's some ability to go beyond the binary, right? And I have to admit, for some reason, when I got dressed this morning, I decided to put on my Guattari t-shirt again. So I'm just, there's something about Deleuze and Guattari that I keep, it's like one of the most simple ideas of theirs that seems to have the most popular recognition around people that don't, haven't read their work, but are mainly, or at least have some familiarity with what their contribution is, and that a lot of that has to do with going beyond the simple binary dualism. If you notice, I do keep this Philip K. Dick poster in the background, and I don't know. I mean, I have to admit that for one thing, when I bought that poster when I was very ill, and I was like doing random. I just had this desire to redecorate, and this was right before I went to the hospital, and I was just very sick, and I ordered a bunch of posters. So I wasn't really in my right, but it was a cool looking poster. And then when I was in the hospital, I read Philip K. Dick's, what was it? The Transmigration of Timothy Archer. And in the Transmigration of Timothy Archer, Philip K. Dick, it's kind of interesting because he's writing from the perspective of a character. And so it's like, and the way that the character's points of view may not necessarily be the author's point of view. And the other character's points of view may also not be his view. So, but he writes about astrology in a way that doesn't sound very friendly to astrology. So I'm always self-conscious about being a astrologer with a Phil K. Dick poster in the background from reading that book. So I just wanted to put that out there. But there is something Philip K. Dick said once, that everybody knows Aristotelean two-value logic is fucked, right? And what is interesting is that, so there's something about I'm just noticing a trend online that there seems to be some problem with this kind of Aristotelian two-value logic, and I'm noticing this pattern showing up in a bunch of different conversations, right? It basically has to do. I think it has a lot to do with identity politics, and I think the thing about Jubilee, these Jubilee videos, is that it has to do a lot to do with identity politics in the sense of one category versus another category, and that you understand one category by contrasting it with another category. And then this goes to another thing about, trying to read Deleuze and Guattari, and in the beginning I used to hit concepts like the Bi-Uni-Vocalization, and get completely confused by it, right? But it's pretty simple. It's basically a vocalization is saying something, and bi-uni is to split into a bifurcation, but uni is a unification, and it's like and I mean, this is why a lot of people are frustrated by two-party politics, and that way that tends to dominate in democracies, right? That there are two parties that seem to take a split on certain issues, but at the end of the day, everybody kind of knows they're just two sides of the same coin, right? It's one system of power and control and domination that has the pretense of having a opposition. You have the government and you have the official opposition incorporated into that system to basically eliminate the threat of any serious opposition that would actually threaten the structure of power or that they have, right? That it's like the opposition is controlled by being incorporated into the system and neutralize anything that would be seriously a threat to the way things operate to those who have vested interest in a power, are neutralized by omitting that out of the system, and the apparent opposition is really just part of the system, right? I mean, I'm going in a sort of political direction with it, but the thing is, you see, what kind of got me going off this was that there's this kind of because first of all, I don't use TikTok, so and this is the whole thing, is that I'm trying to navigate this in such a way that, like, this, it seems like I should just admit that by recording this video, I am just giving into it. But there's some kind, I've noticed this pattern too of, like, there's this chain of reactivity, or like one, which is kind of like the Mercury, like the one person takes the ball from the other person, or like the teams are dribbling back and down up the court, kind of that exchange kind of thing, right? Where one person says one thing, which in turn triggers a response, which triggers a response, which triggers a response, and all this kind of stuff. But I've never noticed this trend where there's this, it's like people, there's this tendency to want to respond to something, but then also not to popularize what you're responding to. You want to correct the problem, but not amplify the problem by making it more viral by referencing it, right? But and there's some kind of like weird kind of like being sucked into the force of gravity of that situation, and I think it has very much to do. There's something about it that feels very similar to the like issues around pop culture and pop music, because it's like the force of gravity of just like where a lot of people are at, or what is getting a lot of attention, or where there's a lot of energy invested in, and I have to admit, I'm kind of just struggling against the urge to just bypass it completely, but there is some thing in there that I want to comment on, right? And it has to do with, like, there's some tendency to go into these, like, very simple bifurcations or dualisms, or like, even, and it is caught up in this thing about, like, the affirming the gender binary and affirming the there's certain traditional there's this whole queer straight kind of thing that is embedded into the conversation of, like, conforming to a definition of what is normal versus deviating away from that, right? And part of this, I have to admit, has to do with the whole territory of neurodivergence. And for me, I have a complicated relationship with this because neurodivergence is mainly centered around autistic folks, and however, the category of neurodivergence includes all forms of neurodivergence. And I guess I'll just use this. I could also just make videos that don't have anything to do with astrology and just get into this and put it out there. But I figure, because I feel like it has to do something with this idea of the binary and Mercury and the tension of the opposites and trying to go beyond this kind of simple binary thinking, right? That neurodiversity, like the word diversity implies a whole spectrum, a whole range, a whole, like you have the image of the rainbow, all the different colors, all this kind of stuff, right? There's a diversity of all this different stuff going on, and yet there's a tendency that, and this is like, it's something of the way the mind works, that it's just like a certain habit of the mind that people struggle with this. People deal with this in like philosophical ways. People then mystical, schools or religious or shamanic. People deal with Carl Jung, the tension of the opposites. So you could take it in all these different directions, right? But there's something. It's like it's a ongoing problem, the trap of dualism, right? Where it's like, but there's also some good things. There's a big thing to unpack here. So it's like the main issue with this is that the diversity, right, which is the image of the rainbow is supposed to represent a diverse range of different colors that aren't just set up as dualistic contrasts, right? Like you can have contrasting colors where the color orange is contrasted by the color blue, or the color green is contrasted by the color purple, right? But you don't understand the whole wheel of color by simply just thinking in dualities, right? Because between green and purple, blue isn't just like an opposite of green. And this is where you get the wheel and astrology comes in. You get this kind of circle, right? Rather than just 2 points opposing each other on a line, you have a circle. And then in the circle, you can draw different geometric shapes or whatever. You get more complicated. Maybe I'm getting off track here. But the point is that one thing I like about astrology is that astrology itself encourages more of a multiplicity or a pantheon, a whole, a multiplicity of forces. The multiplicity is an inherent part of astrological practice, and it's true that it's all stuck into a system like of organization, but I mean it's a way that you can get out of just thinking binary and think about things in multiples, right? Now, however, the thing about what I find weird about, like, I've been kind of like staying away from trying to like make videos which are catered towards a neurodiversity or neurodivergent crowd, and a lot of it, like, there's certain things that I get frustrated with, which are like the tendency towards taking something, rather than looking at it in terms of diversity, looking at it in terms of neurodivergent versus the normies or the neurotypicals. A binary opposition, neurotypical, neurodivergent, right? Which is like all the diversity goes out the window if you just define it as there are divergent people and there are normies, right? Or then in another way, there's also, I'm hearing this one, like, I don't know if I understand it, because I don't know if I'm on the autistic spectrum or not. I've never been diagnosed as it, and I've known people who have been, and I don't know. I don't know if it applies to me or not. I'm ignorant on it. I do have diagnosed conditions that I don't have anything to do with autism, though, which I'm not going to get into right now. But the thing is, there's this focus on neurodiversity around autism, and then you get into this thing about like autistics versus allistics, and I guess I don't really. I mean, I should probably. Hopefully, maybe I did more research, right? But I'm assuming allistic just means not being autistic, right? But then again, the whole diversity thing goes out the window. That you have your in-group, and then you have everybody who doesn't conform of that being lumped in with this. It's you and the other as this simple binary thing, and then or like the neurodivergent folks and the normies as this just simple thing. And then what I find this interesting is there's this. I might as well link to the video that got me going off this train of thought. I'll put it in the comments. But there's this whole pattern which I think comes down to problems with social media and algorithms, probably, because there's something about the way that algorithms are designed off neural networks. Right? And neural networks are designed on this premise of what fires together, wires together. And there's something about this which goes very well with astrology too, because astrology is all about looking for acausal patterns of connection, like synchronicity. We're not saying that the planets, or at least, I don't know, there's all sorts of astrologers out there. The kind of astrology that I follow is one that does not posit a causal mechanical connection between astrological alignments and worldly events manifested. That it's not like there's some secret gravity force that's making things happen. It is going more on the rationale of symbolism and the psyche, and there's a kind of inherent integrity with all things, that all things are connected to this same principle, and there's a kind of continuity between all these things which are on the surface disconnected, are at a more fundamental level they're all interconnected, and there are weird resonances that are, it's more like poetry or rhyming, like one thing that happens rhymes with another thing that happens, and that you get into this weird poetic mythological form of consciousness, right? That is kind of where I'm approaching it from, right? And the mythopoetic form of consciousness works really well with this pantheon of multiplicity, rather than just being about simple binary opposites, right? And now, okay, where am I going with this? I'm kind of getting lost here. There's something about the binary opposites, neurodivergence versus neurotypical, basically, like, I kind of hang back. Okay, straight up, because my diagnosis is a mental health diagnosis, more on the bipolar side of things, right? They kind of in that area, and as a result, I do consider that a form of neurodivergence. But there's too much of there's also this thing that I also get frustrated with, is that I ended up being much more involved online in spiritual emergency communities, but there's always this problem where people get really hung up on, can you really be confident that the thing you are experiencing is a spiritual emergence as opposed to just being mentally ill? And there are practitioners who, probably for good reason too, I'm not going to criticize these people. The people need to set boundaries, right? Like, if you are a practitioner, there may be people who have mental illnesses, you put as much weight on believing in the DSM and all this kind of stuff or not, but you can believe in diagnosis or not. There could be people who have problems that are too severe that you need to, that practitioners want to set a boundary and say that I'm not going to do my, spiritual entrepreneur practitionership for people who are too far gone into mental health crisis, because that's just too much for me. I can't deal with it. It's beyond what and then, that's just being fair, right? Because you don't want to take on anything that you're not capable of taking on, right? But that also turns into this thing of like, I'm a spiritual practitioner and I help guide people through transformative spiritual crisis, and that's my area of expertise, and I see schizophrenia, I see bipolar, I see mental illness as something fundamentally different that I don't know anything about. So I stick to what I know, which is the spiritual stuff, and we leave the schizophrenic stuff for the professionals, right? And the professionals, if you try to talk to the professionals like Kundalini, they say you're probably, like, Kundalini doesn't exist, so if you believe in Kundalini, you have a delusional system of thought, and you're, like, the professionals have, are, it's like it's a whole cliche about like when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. All they know how to do is stick drugs into people, and they don't have any idea of they have a huge backlog. The system is overloaded as fuck, so they don't have any time. Like, somebody wants you to like spend time, you want to listen. What are you gonna do? Take an hour so you can listen to this person talk about stuff? They know they won't. As soon as they can diagnose that you're delusional, they give you a drug, and that's it. They don't. There's no listening to you, trying to understand you, trying to So it's basically you have that binary opposite of like, either you are on a spiritual path or you are just fucking crazy, and we need to like stick you in a mental hospital, insane asylum, lock the door, throw away the key, don't talk to him again. Just he's imprisoned as a schizo for life and isolated, right? And then that is, to me, it's, I don't like that, right? But there is also this problem of like, and then there's this kind of thing too about like, there's the question of people who have mental health problems and who are in denial about it, versus people, this idea that if you're more likely to admit that you have a problem, you're maybe more grounded and more balanced and more like admitting that you're not like perfect, that you're not like some like inflated master who's got everything worked out, and your own, like you can see like you're a flawed, imperfect person, and your awareness is making you more aware of your flaws and your imperfections, rather than just being like, I only work for people who are on the path of not be, what I mean? Like, it's the truth is that we do this thing where our Aristotelian two-value logic wants to think in these like neat but the actual truth may be that it's all mixed up together, right? And I actually didn't get along very well in the spiritual emergence community, because it's like everybody, like, if people want you to like, people are encouraging me on one hand, they think I'm like intelligent, they think I can, like, I'm a good writer or something, but it's like, if you want to make a career as a writer, it's like you have to appeal to a certain audience, appeal to a certain crowd, or like somebody wants to like involve you in their project. If you can do something to support the idea that they have, and if their idea is like, we want to have these like dualistic binary systems where we want you to like, create these like, sort into our system of like dividing, cutting people up and dividing them, and everything dissect. It's like, no, it's like, we don't, like, I can't. I don't know. I'm not gonna. That's why approaching it from the angle of astrology has always made more sense to me than being all like. Then this is what I'm talking about. Like, I haven't watched any of these Jubilee videos because there's something inherently repulsive about it to me. But they'll have things like spot the fake, right? And this goes with this issue around authenticity in an online context. There's so many. Notice how many of these Jubilee videos that are like, spot the imposter. We've got in a crowd of people who are the real authentic thing, one person is faking it. Can you spot the fake, right? And then and we have this, for some reason we are obsessed with this dualistic thinking that of splitting things into categories that also there's two categories that at the end of the day end up saying the same thing, right? That you think they're set, like in the same. There could be this thing where you have the yoga kundalini mystical devotees, and then you've got the weird schizo delusional people, and that you create this Bi-Uni-Vocalization where you're trying to differentiate who's the authentic, person who's having an authentic experience, having an authentic awakening, who's the one who's just pathological, who's just delusional, who's just in denial or something. And then you realize that it's actually just like the Democrats and the Republicans, or that the people, or then you've got people who are jumping boat from one side to the other, going back, or that it's always been mixed up, and that it's like we want to make our ideas of the world. We have these ideas, that an idea can become this pure thing, right? That you can separate what it means to be. Like the idea of the divine masculine and the divine feminine people talk about, that you can somehow distill some kind of quality of like pure masculinity, pure femininity that is separate from all the diverse range of. You can have many different ways to be a man, many different ways to be a woman, but people are obsessed with distilling it down into one pure ideal that is transcendent. Because it's as an ideal, it's separate from this world where everything's mixed up, right? Everything is a chaotic mess, right? And what's kind of funny is that first there's this tendency for it just to devolve into this like cacophony of chaos. Because it doesn't, we're trying to like split it into these neat categories in our heads, and it doesn't, and we get overwhelmed. I don't know. Maybe this is too messy, right? But there is, what I'm seeing, it's at least encouraging to see criticism by a bunch of YouTubers online about the habit of falling to the dualism in terms of affirming a box, a category, or an in-group, right? Which is like, and it has very much to do with this obsession around authenticity, right? About like, and it's like, it has to, like with like being a DJ or something like that. I mean, it's kind of a cliche thing, obviously, but I don't know. I've never been a serious DJ myself, but I do like electronic music and going out to those things. But there's also this thing about like the authenticity contest, right? And the idea of like the laptop DJ, or the person who's DJing off their iPhone is not legit or something, or somebody doesn't know how to do vinyl, like they're not legit, there could be, I don't know, maybe this is also a distraction, but there's also like the idea of something about like going back to the astrology. Mercury itself is known as the trickster archetype, right? Gemini has associated with the problem of being two-faced, or of being able to show multiple different kinds of expressions, but the multiplicity is often associated with a kind of a distrust, because there is and this is what keeps, to me, the whole issue around this. Why is gender conformity such a big problem? Like, of what people are fixated on, right? Because it's the same thing about like finding what is authentic. If you pick out like who is the fake amongst all the people who are the real deal, right? If you're trying to define a category, who is the ones that really fit in the category and who don't, right? And then, but then, okay, what I was talking about, like the neural network, right, is that there may not be causal associations between, let's say, being autistic and having a certain fashion or a certain hairstyle or something, or but there's like some kind of like typifying system that wants to organize everything into these neat categories. If you have this diagnosis, you like this kind of music, you wear this kind of clothes. This is what the video I'll link in the comments basically argues against this, because it just doesn't work that way. But for some reason, the way it's not the thing is, I don't think it's just the way that our human minds work. I think it's the way that the algorithm works. Is that if a bunch of people who are watching videos about neurodivergence are also listening to, let's say, Aphex Twin, right? And there's some sort of like idea that Aphex Twin is, or like people who like Aphex Twin and Autechre are neurodivergent. Because the guy in Autechre is actually literally neurodivergent. He actually is autistic. And maybe Aphex Twin is autistic too, right? But then you start to get this idea that like, oh, all autistic people must like Autechre because the guy in Autechre is autistic. But that may not actually be the case. But there could be something about Autechre which is sort like that could ring true for some people. But then there's this sort of thing that like if you aren't autistic, you start listening, like let's say you're just a normal neurotypical person who just likes Autechre, you might start getting like you do a certain thing that has no real direct relation to some other way of categorizing you, and then this algorithm starts trying to create a box of, or like even if there is no causal connection, it could just be like trying to create like the system of organizing people, like people who have autism who shop at this particular store and who like to buy this particular thing, and like, strawberry is their favorite flavor of ice cream, and you know what I'm trying to say? It's like trying to understand people by this sort of like database of like consumer preferences. And that the more our online, like we spend so much, I don't want to spend so much time online, because it's like the online world is created by a corporate culture that there's a huge data economy in harvesting your information and trying to like target market your demographic. And even if there is no connection between having a certain neurotype and listening to a certain music, or having a certain fashion sense, or liking this, the machine doesn't care. The machine is going to look for any, like, oh, there's a bunch of people who like this band also like to eat at this kind of restaurant. Then, like, even if there's no causal relationship at all, the machine algorithm is just going to, like, any data which pings a correlation, it's going to try to, like, make something out of that, right? It's like, and we are just, like, we live in such, like, a media-saturated environment. It's like, I just feel like it's like people, it's like this kind of Baudrillardian nightmare, right? There's this guy, John Baudrillard, who talked about another book I haven't read, but maybe I'll get around to it. This idea that our media world is like, this question is, does art create life, or does life create art? Right? That we make all these movies and TV shows and, social media things based on our actual real lived lives. But ever since from being a young person, I always had this unshakable sense that the real life experience that I was having as a young person, and it did not match the media world that was always being fed to me, right? And when I watch, I'm trying at least to participate in this. I don't know if it's like, because you can't escape it. Even if I didn't record videos, even if I didn't participate in it, I would still be in that world where people are basically brainwashed by the media, and then creating more media, which is basically regurgitating that brainwashing. And it's like this. It's the same way that like AI art starts feeding on itself like the Ouroboros, like the snake eating its own tail, right? It's like the same thing as if you start like feeding AI art its own stuff and it doesn't have any original thing to feed off of, it starts to feel like, and like the pop culture, you know, culture industry media machine is this really artificial thing, and like we are just like regurgitating this artificial machine thing which wants to like create superficial categories to keep people boxed into, and then feeding us this content that's like, can you pick the person who's the imposter? Can you identify, you know, who's real, who's authentic, right? And like what you're doing and it's also, you can see, even it's funny because it's like the it feels like one of those AI artificial intelligence tests. Are you a robot? Can you select all pictures that have a stoplight in it? Select all pictures that have a boat in it. Select all the real DJs and tell us which one's the fake DJ. Select all real men, real women, and tell us who's the fake man, who's the fake woman, right? Or whatever. Like, what is, like, and they're having this really, people start to have this really narrow idea that there's only one way to be. If you are, there's one of the things, okay, I don't know, this is going to be the first time I mention this on my channel, but it's been going on for a while now, a few months, that often, if I'm assuming somebody in my audience, maybe even somebody I know, that I mean, I don't have much real contact with people in terms of like talking with them. But what I notice is that this weird parasocial things with the algorithm, oftentimes when I record and upload videos like this and post them, I start getting recommendations for a guy named Dean Blunt. Like sometimes, there's a lot of times like right after uploading a my these videos, I like my feed is flooded with Dean Blunt stuff, right? And I have to admit that, okay, I will include in this the link to the Dean Blunt documentary, and you can watch it and make your own decision on it. But there's something about Dean Blunt where like specific, like, I don't know if I'm like gonna be listening to this guy's music all the time, but there's specific things that this guy has said that kind of like resonate with me. Yeah, and one of those things is like this guy's a black guy from, I guess, London. He's in the UK, and he is an electronic musician, DJ, and he in one of these interviews, he is telling a story about how some guy is just trying to get him to play trap music, and him feeling really. One thing that's interesting about Dean Blunt is that I've noticed he's trying to he pushes in this direction that is maybe more kind of like the UK indie guitar sound that is more associated with white people music. Right? Like, he's trying not to get stuck in the stereotype of what urban black men music is supposed to be. He's trying, he kind of goes beyond that, right? But there's a bit of a satirical thing often. I'm not going to explain it all, but the point is that he said that maybe you can, I don't know, I'm not going to act it out. That he ended up making this baring his teeth face at the guy that was trying to just get him to play trap music at the show, and his rationale was that he heard somewhere that if you make this face like you're baring your teeth at it like a dog would at a dog, it makes the dog's balls hurt, right? And so he said, if I make this like mean snarling face at this guy and he feels uncomfortable and looks away, then that must mean that he's a dog. Because like if you make the dog face snarling, baring your teeth at a dog and you react to that, that must mean you're a dog. In the same way that if you're a black guy, you must like trap music, or that if you are, if you're an autistic person, you must like want to like dye your hair purple, or if you like Autechre, that must mean you're autistic, or if you like making astrology videos, that must mean like you are a like one of these white women with like blonde hair and like the who's like the what am I trying to say, like the I don't know, like there's certain stereotypes, right? There's certain stereotypes, and there's the system of like this binary thinking is always trying to like conform, like like if you're talking about neurodivergence, it's like it always, instead of talking about a diversity, it's always just like the neurodivergence versus the neurotypicals, the autistics versus the allistics, the normies versus the weirdos, like, and it's just kind of like, and there's this sort of like thing where it's like, it's not, and there's also the whole thing about like heteronormativity and all this kind of stuff as well. But like the whole thing also just turns into like, if you are like, when it comes to like the whole, this really rigid sense of masculinity, that's like, if you are a man, you have to be buff, you have to work out, you have to like fishing, you have to like cars, you have to like football. I just personally, like, I've never felt that way. I don't, like, there's something about like, or like there's only this category where, this is what Deleuze and Guattari were talking about, that there's like, it turns into this thing where through basically like redundancy, right? And it's like, because it's like, we get fed these, the images we get fed at such a young age, where you play with action figures like superheroes, and all the men have these huge muscles, and it's like you watch all these action movies where Batman is in the Batman is in the dark alley, and the heroes are always like fighting some criminals, and you have to be some tough man, you have to be a tough man who knows martial arts, because some person is just going to mug you in a back alley, and and you're not going to have any like chances if you're not that kind of guy. And then like, it's kind of like there's something like, or like there's only one way to be a person, one way to be a man, or that, because we're always arrested into, there's a redundancy to it, right? Of course you don't want to get your ass kicked in a back alley. Of course you don't want to get robbed. Of course you don't want to get jacked. Of course you want to be employed. You want to have a job. You want to fit in with society and not be bullied and not be harassed and not have people mock you. But it creates a system where there's the conforming to the majority of what's acceptable, which to some degree is redundant, because there's good reasons why you don't want to be disabled, you don't want to be weak, you don't want to be unemployed, marginalized, all this other kind of stuff. But there's this constant just sense of having this box policed, and that can also be the box of like positive masculinity or toxic masculinity. Are you conforming to our ideals of what we want people to be like, or are you just some divergent into and there's no, what the whole Deleuze and Guattari thing is basically like being, they're just saying that like there's this tendency for people to be blind to the multiplicity, where you're basically like, there's one thing that you either conform to or you don't, and you can't see anything other than that. It's either yes or no. You're with us or against us. You're a weirdo. You're a normie. You're a boy. You're a girl. You're conforming or not conforming. You're conforming to the standards of normality, or you're outside that, or you're conforming to what we decide is acceptable for trans people, for non-binary people. And you're either non-binary or you're not non-binary, right? You're either, and I mean, I think there's at least an opportunity with this astrological dynamic, with the square to Uranus, to just break out of that, to rebel against it, to do something different. And I'm going off this thing, which was, I think it was Rick Levine who was saying that Uranus represents that you have a lot of tension between opposites. It's like the lightning strike that's like resolving that tension, right? And I don't know. I'm just using this as an opportunity. There is, for some reason, I end up watching neurodiversity videos, and I always think, it always makes me feel like I want to like respond or react or comment, but I don't. I feel like if I really just try to get into it, I'm bound to like. I don't want to cause trouble for myself, and I don't want to piss people off, and I don't want to feel like I'm trying to make. I don't want to come off as if I'm like against people's for challenging. You know, this is the whole thing. I don't want to feel like I am antagonizing people by challenging the way that they identify themselves, right? And I think that's a lot of like there's this whole problem with like I don't know, maybe it could just be the way that I think about things, or that I have a tendency, if I'm going to get into it, I'm not going to avoid being critical, right? But the thing is, it's like people take criticism antagonistically, because if there's something that, like, there's a lot of times it feels like it's this kind of like fandom culture where people have like set themselves up as identifying with certain fandoms, right? And if you're like really like camped out in being like, I like this thing, I collected the whole series, I read all the books, watched all the movies, I'm a super fan, and if you criticize the thing that I'm a fan of, you're criticizing me. I am part of the army. It's here to defend the thing that you're criticizing. So it's like this kind of thing that there's like the fandom around a thing that if you have any criticism of it, they take it personally. And you don't want to, you want to criticize something going on without criticizing the people who have identified themselves with it, right? And for this thing, the thing is like I don't really feel like if I was going to get involved with, let's say, wanting to make a contribution to like anything to do with neurodivergence or maybe more other forms of like talking about mental health, I'm not going to do it uncritically, right? I'm not going to make a contribution that's just completely uncritical. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to say what I have to say, right? But I don't want to make a I don't want to feel like I'm against autistic people because there's something about the way it always gets pulled into these directions that annoys me. But it's at least encouraging to see that there are other YouTubers that are. I mean, maybe it's not even necessary for. Maybe I'm just joining the chorus here because like I don't have. I don't know. This feels really messy. I don't know. Maybe this isn't a good video. I'm at least attempting to address the problem, anyways, right? Like that. I want to be able to have a critical view on what is going on without being just taken as a total antagonist, right? But then, even that, I'm mixing up. Like I have a desire to like belong to a group, to have, and there's some kind of thing with like these movements where you can just like if you can just turn off your critical thinker mind and approach it from the point of view of like I'm going to be uncritically supportive and like just make friends, and then because I don't consider myself to be neurotypical, then I'm an ally with all these other neurodivergent people, and I just want, I have good intentions, I want the best for them, I want to be a supportive influence. But there's something where it's not that simple, unfortunately, I'm bound to disagree with probably like everybody about everything. That's just the way I like, and if I have if people, this is the problem, is like people say, oh, like you're so talented that you've got these ideas and you think, and it's like, yeah, but like if I actually try to present those ideas, there's going to be, for every idea I have, there's going to be somebody that disagrees with it. There's going to be somebody that's challenged by it. But then it becomes, again, it's the same thing of like this whole thing about like this binary thing where like we have our thing that we have set up and we all belong. We have this identity, we have this category, we have this box, and we feel safe in this box, and we feel mutually supported in this box, and that anybody who thinks differently from us, that challenges the way we've built this category that we've structured is an antagonist to us, because it's us versus them. It's the autistics versus the holistics, the neurotypicals versus the neurodivergents, the normies versus the weirdos, the us, and it's like, you can't contribute anything to it if you take any difference as an attack coming from the outside that is going to that's going to. But the problem is that there's some kind of the problem is that there's some kind of part of my style that I don't know, there's something about, I'm thinking acid, right? Not just not LSD is literally a kind of acid, but there's something about the metaphor of acid as being corrosive or dissolving, or also the whole problem about postmodern deconstruction. That people are threatened by the deconstructionists. People feel like if you try to take a critical, deconstructive approach to things, they're just going to end up broken in pieces, falling apart with gaping holes. It's all just going to be decomposing and deteriorating. And there's something about this Mercury Cazimi, Mercury going through a death rebirth, which is feels just letting it kind of just decompose, fall apart. But there's people feel that that is a destructive, negative thing to do, basically. That you're not contributing anything. You're just like a corrosive acid that's eating away at everything that we hold dear. Oh, my sense of identity, my community, my belonging, it's all just dissolving because somebody doesn't like the way we create this binary category of you're either with us or against us. You're either, I think, and there's at least some way to break out of that, maybe. At least this is what my idea is. Hopefully you like it. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Thank you for following me, all my supporters. Okay,